Macklin Celebrini is just starting out his NHL career, but I wanted to take note of something I saw with his outside edge, particularly when we compare it to other players like a Connor McDavid with his turns specifically. And so let's dive right into what I'm checking out. And it came mostly from this clip right here with Macklin's punch turn. Now, that's a great move. Obviously, he was able to get around the defender, albeit that was just a coach in this case, and that's just practicing and preparing for a move like that so that it can be translated into games. But I want you guys to pay attention real close to right here with these little steps. Something is a little different when you compare it to the likes of other players like a Connor McDavid. But first, I want you to still see what I'm seeing exactly. It's within these two crosses that I started to notice that, okay, maybe something with his outside edge could use a little bit of work. So let's pull up McDavid, which is on the right-hand side, and he's practicing punch turns specifically. And so you will see a clear difference with his turns and his crosses especially that you don't get with someone like a Celebrini, or that Celebrini doesn't get himself. And the big difference I'm looking at is the rocker of the skate blade with the McDavid versus a Celebrini. You'll notice that McDavid is able to glide through the turn quite a bit, and every step that he takes has him keep gliding forward, like with these steps right here. Like he's still gliding as he's stepping. Every step allows him to keep moving forward, whereas you don't always get that with every step on the outside edge that you have with Macklin right here. The pull of the board is kind of in the way, but still want you to pay attention to that, where the glide time is significantly different on the crosses right there. And if we do something similar, see something similar with McDavid's crosses, you'll see that every step he takes allows him to glide. And the way that you have this happen, the way that you cause this for yourself, is a couple things, and we'll take a closer look at some other clips that make this a little bit more clear. But you'll see, even in those steps, he takes a step, he's still gliding forward a significant distance, whereas with Macklin, he ends up gliding backwards, especially on this step right here. Now, this clip was the main difference for what I started to see as a pattern with Macklin's outside edges. We'll dive more into why it's a little bit more complex for the outside edge compared to the inside edge. But this is the first comparison to make. Let's pull up another clip. To finish off on the punch turn rocker argument, let's take a look at McDavid again on the right. And you will see with every turn that he makes, he is still gaining momentum out of his turns. And therefore, he's also gliding every time that he takes his punch. He's able to, clearly you can see it, he's able to maintain the momentum. Whereas, once again, with Celebrini, especially on this clip, he has to take extra steps in order to keep his momentum. Now, he does have a little bit of momentum right here, like on that, after he takes that punch. But to the degree that it's similar to guys like a McDavid, who I believe has one of the better punch turns in the league, or you have like a Matt Barzal as well, that is much more difficult to get a very similar effect where you're keeping your momentum. Sometimes it isn't necessarily taught or not necessarily giving the awareness around. But something like this is what separates guys like McDavid, guys like Barzal, the best skaters in the world, from anyone below them. It's Sometimes it's very, very minute, but it makes such a big difference. I also don't think it's a matter of Celebrini turning tighter. Even when you put McDavid into a tight, much tighter space to turn, he's still able to keep his momentum going forward, able to cover more ground with his steps, if you want to call it that, because of this extra glide forward. This is actually probably the best comparison between both McDavid and Celebrini, where they mimic basically the same exact situation. And so you see how Celebrini's 2 steps right here don't take him nearly as far as McDavid's right here with his 1-2 right there. And that's because of the gliding, rockering issue, like I pointed to earlier with that step for Celebrini. And then you see with McDavid, he's still gliding forward on that outside edge. There's still a little bit of glide forward. The camera angle does move a little bit, but you will still see movement. I think you can see it actually right there. The foot actually doesn't stay in, that foot actually doesn't stay in place, whereas Celebrini's kind of moves backwards, and it's the same case right here. That's a little tougher to see from the camera angle, but you can still see it on that second cross when compared to right here. It is simply just not the same. You could say that they're in different situations because this guy's in practice and this guy's in game, but really, like, look at the placement where they're at on the ice. It's very similar, and one person covers more ground and the other one simply doesn't. So there's a mechanical difference from right here to right here. And that's all I'm pointing out is the mechanical differences, particularly with Celebrini's outside edge. Now, to give a more complete analysis right here, I'm going to point to something I saw in his crosses. And by the way, this isn't just limited to just this clip or just this clip. Even though I'm only going to be looking and nitpicking one video of Celebrini, this is a common occurrence of him in every other movement that he does. I'm just using this one clip for the sake of this video. And I also believe that using someone as good as Connor McDavid with his skating and also specifying how good he is with his punch turns is also important for us to understand, because we keep saying that McDavid is the best player, best skater on the planet, but no one actually has gone really in depth into specifying what makes him good about his turns, for instance, where it's they only describe the after effect, oh, he turned very fast. But what makes the turn so good compared to other players who try out that turn, for instance, Celebrini right here, and then they don't move the same way as a McDavid? And once again, it's because he's able to glide and maintain momentum. He has more of his weight to his heel. He has that knee over the toe. All the heel pressure is here. That's what makes him glide forward, whereas Celebrini is on his toe when he rockers to right, especially on the second step. He's on his toe more than he's on his heel, which is why the foot rockers this way instead of rockers forward. McDavid has the weight to his heels, which is what makes him, once again, rocker forward, very clearly in a clip like this. Now, maybe in a specific case like this, it is a wider turn, but I have seen from Celebrini that his feet will also be staggered much wider across than a McDavid will be, even if he has lankier legs when you compare Celebrini to McDavid. All of this is just a mechanical difference. It's, once again, very minute, but very important, because this also explains why McDavid's so fast and why he's so good with his skating. It's all the form points that makes all the difference, honestly. But if we're to touch on the second part that I wanted to look at with Celebrini's crosses, there's actually 2 avenues I'm going to take a look with this, and we're actually going to compare it to McKinnon when we get a chance. But just want you to take a look at his crosses. Now, I'm not concerned with the amount of crosses that Celebrini does. See, like right here, 2, 3, 4, probably like 4 to 5 crosses he does right there. Because McDavid does similar 1, 2, 3. Like you could say he does like 3 to 4 in a case like that. Now Celebrini does get blocked off in the specific angle that he has right here. But I want to point out something again with the outside edge comparing to a guy like McDavid. When you take a look at his movements overall, he's able to accelerate with his crosses, partially because of that same rock ring problem we saw with Celebrini's punch turns. I would suspect that's part of it. McDavid just gets way more momentum out of his crosses, I would say partially because of that shin angle and that heel pressure. And then more of his weight is actually onto his outside edge when you compare it to his inside edge, because it allows him to like fall over. You can get an effect with the hips as well. And you'll notice that it's a fall when you start to look at the angle of the hips. So they kind of start out a little bit flatter right here. When he steps onto that outside edge, they start to tilt even more like that. And then when he steps onto his inside edge, it goes flat once again before stepping onto the outside edge. And then the hips tilt over once again. This is a sign that he is falling with each step that he takes. Let's see if we see something similar with Celebrini. You get a little bit of that, but it's still not quite the same. And I think a solution for that could be the McKinnon gallop in order to get something very similar like this. Let's bring up McKinnon. So the reason I think the McKinnon gallop will help out Celebrini, especially on his crosses, is because of this, that McKinnon biases the outside edge compared to the inside edge. And what exactly do I mean by that? Well, if we take a look at Celebrini's crosses versus McKinnon's crosses, there he goes, and then here we can replay McKinnon's once again. Obviously, there's differences with the context of the play and how many they take and the amount of distance that they get with each of them. McKinnon's kind of like on a wider route, whereas Celebrini is kind of turning tighter. So I'm not talking about the situation or the tightness of the turn necessarily comparing between the two. I'm talking purely from a outside edge perspective, that there's differences between here and how McKinnon's crosses can help out Celebrini's in that specific case. If we were to look at McKinnon's crosses, there is a noticeable bias to the outside edge, and that's what makes him gallop. So if we go through a lot slower, you'll see that the timing that he spends on his outside edge is considerably longer than the timing that he spends on his inside edge. So he's like inside, outside, inside a little bit, and then he gets off. It's considerably, you don't even have to time it. It's considerably longer, especially when you look at it in slow motion. Then when you speed it up, it is much, you can still see it. Whereas Celebrini kind of spends equal time on his inside edge and his outside edge. It's not a bad thing, but again, we're talking about the distance that he's covering and a little bit of his mechanics there and the differences with the outside edge advantage. So if he were to gallop, instead of doing these quicker feet, he would be able to cover more distance and also get a much better mechanical advantage. It'd probably be easier to cover more distance also if you were to have it like McKinnon instead of doing these ones. with the quick feet. McDavid actually does something very similar to McKinnon. It's just much harder to see with McDavid. So that's why I'm using McKinnon instead. But I think if you do the crosses this way, it's going to help out something like the punch turn and the rockering, especially right here, where again it's the rockering's going backwards instead of going forwards. Once again, if you bias the outside edge and force yourself to go forward with your outside edge, you get a mechanical advantage. So he's gliding, and then lifts off, gliding, and then rockers off. Whereas right here, there's like only barely a little bit. It almost stays in place, but then it goes backwards instead. So that's the main difference. That's why I think McKinnon's will help. So those are a few areas of Celebrini's outside edge that I think he could improve on. I'm not critiquing him as a skater. He's doing very well so far. He's reaching a healthy amount of speed with his skating. Like in his first game, he got a pretty good amount of speed bursts over 18, and sometimes he reached 22 miles an hour at one point, which was the fastest out of anybody there. So clearly he's good on his inside edges. And lots of players excel much better on their inside edges compared to their outside edge. But this is the type of stuff that separates the best players from even elite players, is the little details with their outside edge. You get a whole nother world of mechanical advantages. It's not just in tighter spaces. It's also with puck protection. It's also with speed, which is why I keep referencing guys like McDavid, who have completely mastered their outside edges. You can dive into further detail in this with my standard school. That's where we cover more of the specific areas that these players excel at. This is the type of knowledge that I wish I had when I was being taught skating and all sorts of skills with hockey, is the specific things that I needed to work on that would have made me have the same abilities as these great players. So that's what standard school is there to fix. I also have ATG for hockey, which allows you to get the physical abilities of the best players, making sure that your body can do the same abilities, training you into the athlete that you want so that your on-ice performance is better. There's also on-ice workouts within ATG for hockey, and we're going to expand the repertoire of workouts there too. So be on the lookout for that. I also do custom programming and coaching. So if any of you are searching for that, you want a video analysis that is very similar to what I did for Celebrini here, and you want that on a very consistent basis, I do coach that with my players, and they've gotten great results with that. So you have basically your three options. You have standard school, you have HG for hockey, and then you have complete custom coaching and also custom programming. Those are the way to work with me personally. So if that's what you're looking for, check out the links to those. If Celebrini ever comes across this video, or if the Sharks ever come across this video, that would be an honor. This is not meant to criticize their work with him, because clearly I'm not in the NHL, but this is to point out something that could be worked on very easily, I think, and that is basically hammering down the work on the outside edge. So I want to thank you all for watching and listening. I will see you next time.